Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Welcome to Build by Yahoo. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guest is a multidisciplinary artist whose new documentary explores her work before and after a diagnosis of breast cancer. In Serendipity, Prune Nourry gets up close and personal with the viewer about her sickness, the body, and her art. Let's take a look.
If you had a secret power, what would it be? Healing with my hands. I love anatomy. My way of expression is sculpture, focusing on fertility. That's part of me. I was working a lot about the body, but I think I lost my body on the way. I got a call. It was my doctor. She told me that I had breast cancer. You have to freeze your eggs. It has so many links to past projects. Je joue une femme avec les cheveux courts et moins de seins.
Mais quelle idée de dire ça?
Mais c'est vous le sculpteur aujourd'hui.
Vous pouvez signer là aussi.
When you heal, you realize that health is everything. If you're in good health, there is no limit. I learned how to work in a different way. Once you accept, it makes things easier. It brings you to the essential. Health and love and art.
Everybody, please welcome Prune Nourry. Let's hear it. Hi. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for making this documentary, and congratulations, it's a beautiful documentary. We were talking a little bit about this backstage, and I'm curious, I want to talk more about it. Making a documentary that is accessible for a wider audience, but is still very true to your fine art, for lack of a better phrasing, sensibilities, if you will.
Yes. For example, I choose not to have a voiceover in that movie because I'm very bad with voiceover. It doesn't feel sincere. So the whole movie is based on conversations with the writer and producer, Alistair Siddons, that works with Steve McQueen, also incredible personality, dear friend since 10 years. So it's a real trustful conversation. And also, it's an artist movie. So it had to be subjective, where, in fact, in the documentary, you try to be as objective as possible. So it was very difficult for me to accept to be the director, but it wouldn't have been authentic or sincere if I wasn't. So we had a lot of reflection about that with the team.
It's your documentary, it's your mission statement. I actually, based off of what you just said, slightly disagree with you a little bit, because I see documentary more often than not as subjective, because documentary filmmakers want to mimic narrative filmmaking as much as possible. So they go in for the close-ups. For instance, the moment in this film where you are shaving your head, we would see that from multiple angles, maybe slow motion. We would have a conversation. We would have music, swelling music over it to display the drama. Whereas with you, approach it in a much more objective, almost gallery-ish style, if you will, which is a static shot where we are just watching you. And that, to me, feels far more objective and far more subjective for the viewer, but not like you're imposing an idea or an emotion on us as the filmmaker.
I was trying to be, coherent with my aesthetic, coherent with my work, my previous works. And also this movie was a way, finally, to show the strange links between all the past projects I had done and what I was going through. So it was based not only on what I was living at the moment and what I was filming at the moment, but also on all these archives that I had collected along the years about all the projects I had done without knowing that one day I would use them for that.
What is it like to go back and look at all of your previous work in the midst of being ill, in the midst of not being healthy?
Serendipity, it's like that key word where, in fact, I watched suddenly at all these past projects, all these archives images through the filter of serendipity, realizing that it was like a call, like something was meant to be here. When one of your first sculpture is a breast udder, and at some point you have that difficult choice of doing a mastectomy, so taking out your own breast, or one of your first performance is a procreative dinner, which follows all steps of assisted procreation along a dinner that I was doing with star chefs and scientists. And one of the meal at the end of it is the dessert. And I, 8 years ago, decided to, create little panna cotta with my nipple that I molded in almond paste to give it to eat to the people here that were present for the performance. And
how was it? How was the panna cotta? Because I'm a big panna cotta fan.
It was delicious.
Nipple or not, I love panna cotta.
We did the île flottante version also, which was good too. So I still have the mold, but I don't have the nipple anymore. So it's that kind of serendipity that kept going through the whole movie, through the whole process of making the movie, until, for example, at some point, I went back into past archives that I had filmed years ago. I remember I was filming in a lab as a research project, and it was a lab about assisted procreation. And I filmed, people going through egg retrieval and stuff like that. But while I was getting into my archives, I hear the lab woman saying, "Oh, she's doing this woman egg retrieval because of a breast cancer and because she's going to go through chemo." And I was going through the exact same process at that moment, being in the same position that woman. And I didn't remember it. So it kept getting back to me, the serendipity.
One of the, going back to this idea of objective versus subjective is, I think that you, again, allow the viewer to draw these connections, right? You bring up this work early on, but we don't have a voiceover that's telling us what you're telling me right now, by and large. It's up to the viewer to really see a lot of these connections.
I think, art is suggestive, and one should let the space to the viewer. Because when you do an artwork, you do it at first for yourself. It's kind of selfish. It's coming from your guts. You have to do it. But at some point, you let it go and you give it to the viewer. You accept to make it public. Even my terracotta daughters army, that giant army that I've done in China for about 2 years and that I buried back in 2015, to excavate it in 2030, so it's under the ground in a secret place somewhere in China. You cannot see it, but still, before that, I made it travel the world in different countries, like she came to New York, Mexico City, Paris, and people saw it, and I gave it to the viewer, and it wasn't mine anymore. They were walking through the army and, interpreting it. For example, in Mexico City, I remember the people telling me at the museum it was shown, "Oh, this is Mexican girls." I was, no, I did it in China. They are Chinese. No. This is about the situation of women here in Mexico. So, it's like that kind of interpretation is very enriching and very important for the artist.
Do you ever feel the need to correct an interpretation that you see as, like, say you hear it and it just sounds way off from what you intended, or once it's out in the world, whatever you interpret is yours and that is okay?
I learn from it. And sometimes I keep it. I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I should use it. So no, I think it's an exchange.
I think that's one of the major differences between fine art often and something like documentary or narrative filmmaking, is that it is so much more open to, it's intentionally open to as much interpretation as possible.
Yes, I think at first, we all have our frame of reference. We all come from a certain culture, certain background. So we see through these eyes. Spending so much time in China was such an interesting journey for me, because I saw through the eyes of another culture by collaborating with the sociologists there, with the craftsman there, with the little girls that were part of the project. And I think art is about that, like seeing through the eyes of another, and as the artist to also learn from the eyes of the others looking at your artwork. But I like the fact that an artwork can have 2 lectures. So there is the first one that anyone can have, and then if you want to dig into it and know what the artist was trying to say, you can find. So, at the same time, I like to explain my work also, but not at the first time. leave the space first.
But with this documentary, there is an element of needing to explain the work a little bit, or needing to explain the story behind this. In the editing process, how did you find blending that or for you, subjective, I say objective in a way, that stance with making sure that the film was accessible to a larger audience, making sure that it could still help people who go through some of the same things that you went through?
So that was very important to me. I made that film for that, because before that movie, all my projects, I was working on them like a kind of anthropologist, keeping a certain distance about them. They weren't talking about me, even if they were talking about things that fascinated me, obsessed me, passionated me. But
definitely were. If they are talking about things that fascinate and obsess you, then they are talking about you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I wasn't turning the camera on me, to express them. Where for this one, it was a difficult choice because I didn't like that at first. And in fact, the fact of doing it really helped me to be proactive of the illness and creative in the illness. So by doing that gesture and telling action to myself, it really helped me. But I had to pass that step of accepting to be the subject for once. So that taught me a lot.
How did you pass that step?
I passed that step by working with a team also, so the writer.
Talking with them and sort of...
The editor, who is to me like a sculptor himself. So
getting talked into it, basically?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The executive producers also. It's thanks to Darren Aronofsky, for example, here in New York, where I live since 9 years with a dear friend. And he was one of the first to tell me, as an artist, you have that luck. You can transform anything that happens to you into art. So just take a camera and you'll see. And that's how I started to film the process. And it helped me incredibly.
What an obvious and beautiful thing to say. Yeah. Right? Like, what stage were you at in your illness when he said that to you? And was it an immediate sort of like adjustment where you recognized that he was right, or did it take time to realize it?
No. It was a kind of immediate realization because, maybe also that's why I'm doing art in a way. But to hear it was something strong, and especially coming from him and thinking, okay, so maybe the camera should be a tool this time, not to document my project, but to document that illness that in a way I took like a project. I took it like a production. Okay, what can I do? What's the next step? I should see 3 different doctors, get 3 different diagnoses, and I will make the best choice out of the 3. That kind of production mode. You're
making that decision for your health while at the same time thinking this will be great for the documentary.
I didn't know I would do a documentary at first, in fact. I thought I was working on a documentary about the Terracotta Daughters, the project in China. And I was working with it with this writer and dear friend, Alastair Siddons, for about a year. And we had crazy images. And I thought, it's enough, I can do the documentary. I just buried the army, so the most important for me is done. But in fact, when I told him I was ill, he told me, Prune, you have only one thing to focus on right now. Stop putting pressure on yourself to finish that documentary. Your project is until 2030. Your sculptures are under the ground. You're going to excavate them. Leave them space, leave you the time. And that was another incredible advice. And, that's how little by little we started together to shift to the writing of Serendipity. How? Just by, having those crazy links coming in little by little. I was having him on the phone. He's in London. I was like, this is so strange. This happened. And then this happened. And then this happened. So that's how the movie was built organically.
The opening shot of the film, which is the bottom part of a body as it's traveling through a hospital on a gurney, heading to an operation, or not an operation, heading to...
Surgery, yeah.
Oh, it is surgery, heading to surgery, excuse me. Was that a shot that you were actually on the gurney, or is that something that you filmed later that you thought would be an incredible image for the documentary?
No. I filmed it while being in the process. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's great because it brought so much joy out of it, complicity with the doctors, with the nurses. You have to ask if they are okay. They are so happy to be filmed.
Are they really?
They are.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if it would be like that, or if the doctor's like, all right, we got an artist here. Come on, set up the camera.
No, and the strange thing is also that, and I have to say that I didn't pick them for that, but all my doctors were very handsome. This is
true.
Serendipity, coincidence. I have nothing to do in that.
What was the hardest part of making this documentary for you, of making the film?
Accepting to, see myself on the big screen first, accepting also, all these moments where you see yourself not at your best, without hair, all of that, with the white skin, no collant, no eyebrow. Also that question that I'm asking to Agnes Varda at some point.
That's right. We haven't even talked about Agnes Varda being in the film.
Which is, it was a kind of provocation because, of course, I'm not thinking that question really in a way. Thinking that a woman is, if you take off the breast or the hair, is not a woman anymore, of course, is not my point of view. But I wanted to provoke her. So I asked her that question. And, of course, she was like, right away answering against it in such an Agnes Varda way, of course. Yeah. So.
Did you have a relationship with her prior to?
Oh yeah.
Oh, you did, yeah.
Oh, it wasn't meant to be in the movie neither. Like she made me the surprise to film it, right. But the idea was to cut my hair. Yeah. And help me cut my braid because I was doing my braid since years and it was quite strange and like not nice for me to have that gesture of cutting it. And she said, but I did the same when I was 18 to pass from like the young girl to the woman. I cut in my braid, so let's do it together. And she still had her braid. She showed it to me like in a drawer. So we turned that into a game. And like that night, I was like, I should put, a togo on me, like just to costume, because it's always easier when you costume. And I put that togo like a kind of sculpture or Greek mythology, whatever, without knowing that one day I would do that large sculpture, the Amazon, that I did as a kind of catharsis for the treatment, to mark the end of the treatment. So there were many little things on the way like that again wasn't planned. It was like pulling a red thread.
Serendipity.
Again.
Was Agnes an influence on you as an artist? Different disciplines in a way, but yeah. She is still, I think she's thought of as a narrative filmmaker, but she's everything in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Yeah. I think she's a role model for so many women artists, of course.
I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question?
Great. Hi. So you've worked with a bunch of different media formats in all your installations, and I was just wondering if there's any format you'd like to explore in future work that you haven't already.
Ooh. For sure. I haven't discovered it yet. Now there is a show in Paris currently that will end on Saturday, and I tried wood that I haven't done since 10 years. I did a wood sculpture, Craftsman wood sculpture school. So I went back to wood. I used the technique of burning it into black, like I saw in Naoshima in Japan. All the houses are made like that. And I kept that in mind for 10 years to do it. Glass that I tried also, lab glass, which is a very specific technique. So I worked with a master of 40 years in Murano in Italy to do that. So what I love is really the collaboration with Craftsman, because I'm pushing them, by proposing ideas that they say it's impossible, no, it's impossible. And at the same time, because they are specialized into what they do, which, in a way, I'm not specialized as an artist, so I'm going to a technique like glass, where you need 10 years to be just a junior in glass. So that collaboration always brings the best thing, being craftsman and artist together, because we push the limit together. And this is, something I believe in.
How do you find the craftsmen for your work?
Serendipity.
I just wonder how you know that they're going to be right for the task. If it's going to be the kind of thing that they haven't necessarily done before, it's going to be kind of pushing their limits. How you know that craftsman is gonna work well under you.
I love when I hear
with you, not under you.
It's impossible at first. I love when I hear that. And you always find a way because it's impossible and because there are constraints that pushes me to go somewhere I wouldn't imagine. And that's how discoveries happen when you're finally finding something you weren't searching for. But there is always a beginning, something, like a proposition, a vision from the artist where you find that Craftsman just by, I don't know, instinct, intuition, and research, a lot of research.
How often do you find your craftsmen say something like, yeah, I don't think it's going to be possible. Give me a shot. Let me see what I can do. And then they come up with something really beautiful that actually works.
Approximately all the time, yeah.
It's such a craftsman thing to do, to be like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll figure it out.
Exactly.
One more question.
Hi. I was just wondering if there was any part of the film that like you really wanted to be in but didn't make it into the final cut of the film.
Oh. No. I'm thinking, like getting back into all my rushes. No, we used quite everything. Yeah. Some projects that I had done that we didn't use because there were no link with what I was going through, like Anima, which is a jungle that I recreated in the heart of Brooklyn at the Invisible Dog Art Center, where I have my studio, and I worked for a year, like going twice to the Chiapas jungle in Mexico with an anthropologist. She was working with the Mayans, the Lacandones there. So I went to the jungle, spent, maybe in total a month and a half there with her. And we brought back a project of making a whole jungle inside Brooklyn. It was a whole reflection about animism versus naturalism, how you see yourself and the animals and in the nature. In a way how trees, humans, animals can be seen on the same line or can be seen on a hierarchy. So we were questioning those kind of frame of references, and especially taking as an example the family of a man that we met in Chiapas, so Lacandones, who was, seeing since he was a kid, like he had an animal totem, he was seeing himself as an animal, same thing. But one day in the 30s, they took him to show him in a universal exhibition in a zoo. And, it was called the Human Zoo at the time, and you had so many like that. And people were shown like they were animals. And to them, suddenly, that was pejorative to be considered as an animal, where they've been grown up thinking that they were like animals. So it's, that question of frame of references, looking through the eyes of another, that we question with that anthropologist into that show. And you see a bit of it, in fact, in the movie. I'm sorry, you see the little spirit that is flying around that we did with a magician. And it was flying around on a pound that we recreated in the jungle with a sculpture. And it's really a show that you had to experiment. It's very difficult to film it, very difficult to explain it. You had to experiment it, but it was very ephemeral.
That is one thing that I love about this film, is that you seem to go to great lengths to still not explain your art, to still find a way to make sure that the audience gets to experience it visually in some way. I think of that beautiful shot that kind of wraps around, forgive me for not knowing the name of the work, but it sort of wraps around. It's like the acupuncture needles, or all of the needles. It's the very large.
Buddha. It's a head of a Buddha.
And the camera wraps around and goes inside the needles and then comes out. It's a beautiful shot, and it abstracts the work in a completely different way than if you were looking at it head on, or if somebody was explaining it. It becomes subjective for the viewer in a lot of ways.
So these ones are inspired by the Buddhas of Bamiyan. And so the one that were destroyed in 2001 by the Taliban, that was the first time the large public, me included, were hearing the word Taliban for the first time. And those two Buddhas who were destroyed were, in a way, they were large, huge, gigantic, and they were, in a way, symbolizing what would happen 10 years after, in 2011. And it was like art was destroyed before humanity, you know, in a way. And right when I did that Buddha, I was invited by a museum, the Asian Art Museum in Paris, and Palmyre happened, another destruction of artworks in a museum by the Taliban. So that's how I decided to, you know, create that gigantic Buddha, broken into pieces, but the head is standing at the top of the museums, and you have pieces of his body at every stairs of the museum until the ground where his feet are there, standing in the ground. And it shows how you can destroy, you know, sculpture, but you cannot destroy an idea. Because finally, these Buddhas, they still have the holes in the caves there in Afghanistan. They are still standing in our mind there. So the sculpture was destroyed, but not the presence of it.
But that said, because you explained that to me here, but in the film, that explanation isn't necessarily there. So for the viewer, that can become about your experience with breast cancer. That can become about your experience with art, and it can become about several different ideas based off of how it's filmed.
And you have like the Buddha is recovered with acupuncture needles, and in fact, there are incense sticks also, and that symbolizes, you know, a kind of reparation of the body, of the soul after that destruction. So yes, there is an echo with what I was going through, and acupuncture helped me incredibly. That was my pillar, and it's still. I'm going there every week or 2 weeks.
Can you, before I let you go, there's one more piece of art in the film that I love so much, and forgive me for not describing it well, but it's a small sculpture, and we see it in the trailer. It's like a boy. Look, I mean, it sounds to me like the human zoo in a way, but it is like a human boy almost, but with an animal face looking up forlornly, and the eyes are so innocent and beautiful and lifelike. Can you talk to me about that piece?
So she's called the Holy Daughter, and she's a hybrid between an Indian holy cow and a little girl. And it's to highlight the paradox that Indian cows are sacred because they are a symbol of fertility. But no one wants to have the girl who is vector of fertility because she will be a mother one day. So I created that genetic hybrid inspired by all the hybrid deities that you have in India. And I started to place them in the streets and document people's reactions. That's what you see inside the movie. And the crazy thing is, at the end of my reconstruction, the surgeon proposed me. He was like, we have that new technique. We propose you to graft some a cow fetus skin in your breast to help with the reconstruction. I was like, are you proposing me to hybridize me now? Make me the hybrid? You know about that work I did? And he was like, oh yes, I didn't think about it.
Right, make you like a human cow hybrid?
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
I said no.
Prune, I love the film so much. I'm so glad that you made it and that you came here so I could talk to you about it. It's incredible work. How can people see Serendipity?
Oh, it's going to be released this Friday at the Quad Theater, not far, 13th Street.
Right down the street.
Yeah, exactly. 34 West, 13th Street.
Prune Nourry, everybody. Let's hear it.
Thank you.